Hey everyone, welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Cecil Laird.
Jaime Fuego here.
And we're back for our second installment of horror comic reviews, you guys. So this week we are going to go ahead and continue what we started last week, or more appropriately, Fuego here is going to continue what we started last week. Fuego, what's the book you've got for them?
Oh, I have the second Dark Tower graphic novel from 2008, The Long Road Home.
All right. And I have a really cool independent comic that only just came out in August of 2015, and that is called And Then Emily Was Gone. All right, so nice. We'll get to that one second. Fuego, you're up first. Why don't you tell everyone about Dark Tower?
It's going to be dope. It's going to be twice the coverage every week now. So he's going to pick a book, I'm going to pick a book, but I'm going to continue the course with my beloved Stephen King, and this is a book from 2008 called The Long Road Home. And the interesting thing about this is it's the second book in this Dark Tower Marvel Comics series, which was prequels to the original books. The only thing is, book one, The Gunslinger Born, was actually adapting bits of the first Dark Tower book and then bits of the fourth one, which might be my favorite, Wizard and Glass, whereas for this one, they were finally venturing out into the unknown. They were not adapting stuff that had been previously published, and so Robin Firth is basically this big-time Stephen King historian for the Dark Tower, just all of his interlining works as well that kind of tie in with it and stuff. She is essentially the Stephen King historian as far as all the Dark Tower lore goes, and so she teamed up with Peter David from Marvel, who is, I guess, an esteemed writer. He's worked on so much stuff over the years. He's one of their longest tenured guys, and so they wrote the script based on King's original stuff for the first one, and for this one, completely original, just working off what they thought could be happening after the quartet of Roland and, or Roland, you know, however you want to disagree about the pronunciations, but, and the rest of his quartet. You've got Cuthbert, you've got Alain, and following closely behind, Jaime, who you saw in the very first book. He's one of the characters I was the most surprised about how they expanded with him in this volume. Now, some might argue, you see so much of the Crimson King this time. I mean, and personally for somebody like me who didn't like how they portrayed him in the seventh book, when you got to kind of understand a little bit more about him, I thought, especially the way Jai Lee actually illustrated him in this, it was astounding. He was menacing, he was scary, he seemed kind of silly in the seventh Dark Tower book to me, especially the epic confrontation that inevitably happens, but that's a different video for another day, I suppose. But he was visualized beautifully by Jai Lee in this, and also just Jaime, who was a very small minor character who pops back up in later Dark Tower volumes. They flesh out a backstory for how he ends up in Thunderclap, why he is one of these breakers that's trying to destroy the entire tower. So that's why you need to read the actual Stephen King books to find out what happens with Jaime, but he gets changed as he's following, Cuthbert and Elaine. The reason that I haven't mentioned Roland yet is because Roland has been incapacitated by this glowing grapefruit orb that they stole from Rhea of the Coos, that crazy witch bitch who has set so much of this into motion, from Susan dying in the last one, which that was one of the reasons why I loved Wizard and Glass so much as a Stephen King book. So yeah, only half of it is that whole flashback moment, but I just fell in love with him, with his younger quartet, the first one that he actually had, and so it's really cool to actually get more from these characters that I loved so much, and yet you get only these tiny glimpses of them in these two different Stephen King books. So expanding on the mythos, they're escaping from I think there's one big coffin hunter remaining still alive. All the others have been killed and sucked into the thinny, and so they're trying to get back to Gilead, and they're trying to get back to their parents pretty much, because they're just kids. And so yeah, Roland is incapacitated and he's having all these crazy nightmares, and Jaime ends up coming through to help out and save him. So there's a lot going on that we get to learn about. Yeah, because in the novel they just leave Magus and they head on back, and it just skips to them being back at the kingdom. And so it was actually very rad to find out, the Stephen King approved, even if he didn't write it himself, this was like approved by him to be the continuing story, just done by his sanctioned people. So it was great. The art was tremendous, and I can't say enough about how happy I was with it. It was very cool.
Awesome. Now, what did you think of the presentation? You said a little bit earlier that it moved quicker than the first one, you thought.
It did. I mean, it was only 5 issues compared with 7 for The Gunslinger Born, and so you're gonna expect a slightly more condensed story, but since they're on the run, they're still being chased by some of these guys from the town, and some of the big coffin hunters guys too, as I mentioned. And so there's still a band of at least a dozen people that they didn't get to vanquish, and so they're right on their butt. And so it moves at a very brisk pace, and even the backstory stuff, it's very cool to see some more of the motivation of the Crimson King as far as how he wants to just destroy every fabric of every reality. Because in the King world, or mythology, I guess, there's all these intertwining alternate realities and dimensions and stuff. And so what the Crimson King wants to do is destroy the tower that kind of holds all that stuff together. He wants utter chaos throughout every realm of all realities, and all realities everywhere. I mean, infinite chaos is what he wants, and his reasoning for it, it's kind of presented to make sense, at least from his perspective. You kind of understand it a little bit. You know, he just wants to bask in the destruction. There's an analogy used in the afterword where one of the writers says, you know, the thing is, it's like you build this beautiful sandcastle, right? And you're like, it was worth all the efforts, but isn't it fun to just smash it after you're done? It's an interesting analogy, and so that is the motivation of the Crimson King as you find out more about it, which for me, a huge King fan and someone who's followed the tower for many years, it's cool to get some more some more agenda that's only skimmed over in the books. So.
And what do you think of Lee's art? Now, he did the whole thing.
Dark Tower. Dark.
What do you think of it in regards to his representation of characters that you had read about before and had your own, you know, picture in your head? How do you like seeing this depiction of them?
Maybe they don't appear with as much innocence, at least as for being kids, with this dark, very shaded, approach that he uses. But for Roland, it works because this, as far as his adolescence goes, is the defining moment where he turns into this stern, emotionless, like very just calculated and driven on one thing and one thing only, and that's getting to the tower. Because after losing Susan, it's like he doesn't really care about much else. He turns into this. So for that, showing him with these glowing eyes in certain scenes where he's getting through the possession aspect, and also just that he's a darker character from now on throughout the rest of his journey towards the tower, and with his various cadets, you know, whether it's Susanna and Eddie and Jake, or whether it's, you know, back this younger stuff that we're seeing here, you know, with his buddies when he was a kid. So yeah, the artwork gives it that edge. I mean, maybe not as much innocence, but the innocence has now been lost, so the characters are taking a darker turn, and I don't think things are getting any better, because I know through the lore what is going to be transpiring. So, and now to jump it over to Cecil, who has the cooler indie book. What do you got for us, man?
This one is, as I mentioned at the top, And Then Emily Was Gone. This one's actually written by John Lees. It is art by Ian Laurie. The colors were done by Megan Wilson, and Colin Bell was the letterer on the book. So basically, And Then Emily Was Gone is a really, really interesting experiment. I got wind of it when in Free Comic Book Day of 2015, they gave out an issue, sort of a preview issue. And it was about I think an 8 to 10 page story, something like that. And it had this creature that was on the cover of this, as you can see, by the name of Bonnie Shaw. And it's basically a Scottish boogeyman. Apparently, the deal with Bonnie Shaw is if a parent has some kind of issue, like there's some overwhelming thing in life that's really dragging them down, really hurting themselves or their family or whatever, they always have the option to call for Bonnie Shaw. And basically, Bonnie Shaw will arrange to help you with your situation. All Bonnie Shaw asks in return is that you willfully give up one of your children. So, unfortunately, in the Scottish lore, this has happened. There have been parents that have made the deal with Bonnie Shaw and given up one of or their only child in order to get themselves out of their predicament. So, this story starts off talking about an ex-policeman who is approached by a young girl by the name of Fiona. The ex-policeman's name is Hellinger, and the reason he is an ex-cop, as he basically divulges to the young girl who comes to him for help, is he's like, I can't do it anymore. I'm messed up. I see things nowadays. And he won't say exactly what he sees, but as we see, the artist depicts for us what the ex-cop sees when he's looking around, and that, people, is monsters. Now, what you have to understand about this book is that it's got the artistic sort of roots in, if you're as old as I am, I'm 35, if you're up there with me, then you'll remember MTV's Liquid Television in the mid-90s, okay?
Yeah.
That was the Max, that was Eon Flux, it was this late-at-night, messed-up animation that was just not your average thing. You didn't see it on Cartoon Network, which I don't even think existed at the time, but, you know, Saturday morning cartoons or anything like that. The art in this book is very much akin to that style, or something you might have, again dating myself, might have seen in the Spike and Mike Sick and Twisted Animation Festival back in the day that was an annual event. Basically, if you took that and then you took acid while reading it, that is basically the artwork in this book. Because there are times, in the normal times when the detective is talking to Fiona and they're, doing investigations, it's, normal. It's an odd art style, but it's relatively normal. But when he starts to have his visions, it is crazy. You should definitely not do mushrooms and then read the book. But basically, the ex-cop is asked by this little girl Fiona to help find her ex-best friend, or her best friend Emily. I say ex because Emily is gone. And the little girl Fiona doesn't know what happened to her, but she suspects that Bonnie Shaw got her. But they have no way to prove it, so the policeman and her start to sort of track down leads. She convinces him to help because he has a unique experience with monsters, and she believes that Bonnie Shaw, a monster, is responsible. So the book then is about them tracking down the leads. Along the way, you meet some B-story characters, a character by the name of Vin, that's a hitman, and then his cohort, who is a girl, so they're like a weird Bonnie and Clyde. And then there's this man and wife who we don't know much about, but the man receives a box in the first issue, and you find out very quickly when he brings his wife downstairs into the basement and he opens the box and shows her it's these two snake-like creatures that, and she's like, oh my god, what are those, and he's like, don't worry, they're not gonna hurt us. But you should know, I took them out of our heads last night when we were asleep, and they both have like band-aids on the back of their heads. So there's this really weird stuff that's going on throughout the book. It's so trippy. It's 5 issues, and it's just fun to sit through and see because there's some just messed up imagery in this book, but it's a really interesting read. There's depth to it, but it might not be for everyone. I'm gonna say that much. The story, I don't think necessarily quite matches up to the artwork's level. The artwork is what kept me going. It's what had me hooked, and I just wanted to see sort of the presentation throughout. The story could have been better. I did very much like the ending. The last issue paid off the story. I thought it dragged a little bit in the middle issues. But all in all, you guys, And Then Emily Was Gone is an extremely interesting independent book. And you have to seek it out. Your comic store most likely will not have a copy unless they're very, very good. I had to order this from Amazon, and for a while it was out of stock on there. But if you look at the back here, you can see the pedigree of all of these stars. It's got fantastic reviews from Newsrama, Big Comic Page, Multiversity, Pop Culture Uncovered. I mean, 5 stars across the board. So it's definitely worth checking out, you guys. Let me just show Fuego 1 or 2 of these images just real quick so he can see what I'm talking about.
So as you're breezing through that, I have to ask you, so how was the whole mystery aspect played out? Did it keep you guessing? Was it pretty good? Or was that one of the more lacking areas
That's
of it?
the thing. It wasn't long enough where they had a lot to really investigate. It was 5 issues, and as you can see, they're not the densest of pages.
No.
Like, there's not a whole lot of dialogue per page, so it moves at a brisk pace. Mm-hmm. It does not take long to get through this book, but it is quite interesting. I mean, the character designs you can see, there's this guy with a completely messed up look. The designs are just so interesting, you can't help but keep reading. So rather than drag on and on about it, you guys need to check it out.
It's definitely a little grotesque. I'm curious, though, if this Scottish tale, if it was actually based in real legend or lore or something, or if it was just his spin on it. That's what I'd be curious about, because that got the gears turning in my head immediately.
I don't know. You know, there is a page-long afterword written by the writer in here. I haven't checked it out yet because I finished it pretty quickly before we actually sat down to do the review, but I will be reading it.
Like you said.
I cruised through it really quickly, and I jumped it in to talk about today because I was so intrigued by it. So check it out, you guys. That's one that I'm intrigued to check out now, and I wasn't showing Cecil this one because he owns it. He's read. This is actually his copy. Mine's at home. But yeah, both very worthwhile books. One, a small independent thing that's really just doing something innovative, and then a cool, big corporate, big budget adaptation of a property that is worth all the praise. Absolutely. So thanks very much for watching this week's edition of the Horror Comics Reviews, you guys. I've been Cecil Laird.
Gracias. I've been Jaime Fuego.
And until next time, remember, stay scared.
Support your local comic book store.